Hey everyone, welcome back to Turn Your Lights On. I'm your host Emily, and I'm advising you now, you may want to turn your lights on. Today's episode is going to be released on my birthday, so I would absolutely love it if you guys who listen on YouTube or Spotify would follow or subscribe on whatever platform you listen on, and drop a comment down below sharing what case I have covered that has been your absolute favorite so far. This week's episode is one that's a little different from anything I've researched and shared with you guys, so I want to jump right in. Circleville, Ohio is famous for their Circleville Pumpkin Show, which is a huge festival celebrated by the people in Circleville every fall. The origin of the festival started in 1903 when the mayor of the time, George R. Haswell, orchestrated an agricultural exhibit and street fair. The major part of agriculture was pumpkins that were decorated into jack-o'-lanterns, hence the name the Circleville Pumpkin Show. Since the first year, the affair has grown significantly and has become what Circleville is known for. At this festival, people can enter contests such as the largest pumpkin and the world's largest pumpkin pie, as well as win awards like Miss Pumpkin Show and Little Miss Pumpkin Show. Circleville got its name from the original footprint of the town being a large circle. It has now become more of the typical grid-like town, but its name came from its original state. Circleville is located about 25 miles south of Columbus, Ohio. And according to Nextdoor.com, Circleville has a 98 as far as the safety score goes for the town. So to locals, this town seems very sunshine and rainbows. However, to those who aren't quite as familiar with the area, one of the biggest things that drew attention was the Circleville Letters. So let's jump to the beginning. In 1977, everyone in Circleville's deepest and darkest secrets were about to be put on display for all their friends and families to watch, leading them to go to the extremes to save whatever relationships they had left. An anonymous writer had begun tormenting citizens of Circleville, sending them letters and spilling the individual's darkest secrets within those letters, blackmailing these people and holding their secrets over their heads if they didn't do exactly what they were told to do. These letters possessed information of affairs, murders, domestic violence, and other secrets that any perpetrator would want to keep buried deep in the vault for the rest of eternity. With everyone fighting to protect themselves, rumors spread like wildfire. And if all the rumors surrounding this case are true, the unidentified writer may have started a chain of events that ended in an unsolved murder. But we all know how rumors are. Some end up being the truth, but most end up being far from it. But even though the people being attacked were citizens of Circleville, most of the letters received by the anonymous writer were actually postmarked from Columbus, Ohio. And the first target was no other than a bus driver named Mary Gillespie. And seeing as she was the first target for the letters, she had no idea what she was about to receive in her mailbox on what anyone in Circleville would think was a normal day. Within the letter is very distinct and memorable handwriting. And transcribed within this letter, the writer demands that Mary stop her affair with Gordon Massey, who was the superintendent at the local school. According to 48 Hours, the exact wording of the letter was, quote, "Mrs. Gillespie, stay away from Massey. I've been observing your house, and I know you have children. It's your daughter's turn to pay for what you've done. I shall come out there and put a bullet in that little girl's head." End quote. So not only is Mary both mortified that her biggest secret is known by anyone other than her and Gordon, but she's also terrified for both her and her children. But she tries to shake it off and ignore the letter because she claims that these accusations against her aren't true at all. Mary tries to pretend like everything is fine, like nothing ever happened, which lasts all of about 8 days when she receives her second letter. So now Mary begins to believe the awful consequences that may potentially happen that the writer is leaving for her. Ron Gillespie, Mary's husband, had also started receiving letters in the mail similar to what his wife had received. Ron's letter had read, quote, "Mr. Gillespie, your wife is seeing Gordon Massey. You should catch them together and kill them both. He doesn't deserve to live." End quote. So originally one might think, okay, the writer is exposing something that's very morally wrong, aka the affair, and just going way too extreme in his writing to get Mary and Gordon to do what is ethically right. However, the writer actually then proceeds to threaten Ron too if he doesn't harm Gordon and his wife. And upon Ron and Mary's first interaction, after Ron also begins to receive these letters, there's clearly an elephant in the room. Ron asks her why these accusations are being made and if they're actually true. But Mary still insists that they aren't because she and her husband were actually high school sweethearts. They'd built an amazing family together and that wasn't worth risking to her. And from what I gather from varying sources, Ron seems to believe Mary. So again, they try to shake off the letters. However, the letters keep coming, and this is where Ron and Marie decide, hey, clearly something much bigger is going on here, and maybe these empty threats aren't empty if this person is so persistent with their letters. So they decide to get the local authorities involved to try and solve their weird mystery. So of course, once hearing about the situation, the police's first thought is to stop by the local post office to try and chase down where these letters are coming from. But unfortunately, no luck. Authorities aren't able to get any evidence to decipher an exact location that these letters are being sent from, which means they also aren't able to stop the letters from coming either. And well, they do. The letters just keep coming, and the threats become increasingly more morbid and gruesome with time. So with little to no help from police, Ron decides that it's time to step up as the man of the house and figure out who the person is that's terrorizing his family. Ron even goes as far as to come to the conclusion that he believes the letters are coming from Gordon himself. So Ron decides it's time to pay Gordon a little visit to tell him off. Upon speaking to Gordon, he did in fact know about the letters, but not because he was the culprit. Gordon Massey had been receiving the same letters that Ron and Marie had been receiving. And here we are again, at a standstill. No suspects and many, many more letters to come. But in August of 1977, the situation escalated significantly when Ron Gillespie received a phone call and ran out of his home in a fit of rage with a gun in hand. Before leaving his home, he told his daughter that he was leaving to go and confront the anonymous writer. With Ron's thoughts going a million miles per second, his driving became fast and erratic, which led him to swerve off the road and into a tree. And before anyone knew it, Ron Gillespie had been killed on impact, which was truly heartbreaking and frightening. The writer did tell Ron that his life was in danger if he didn't stop his wife's affair, but nobody thought it would be his own accidental doing. And with all of the letters and threats being sent Ron's way, many speculated if it was actually Ron's doing or if foul play was involved. Amongst further investigation, it was found that Ron had been very evidently intoxicated, with over twice the legal amount in his system, which was super out of character for him. Everyone said that Ron was not a drinker. Could this have been foul play? That part is uncertain, but one thing that does seem to draw attention to Ron's accident is the fact that his gun had been fired. and many toy with the idea that he could have possibly been shooting at something or someone when he lost control of his vehicle. And to add to the chaos and fear ensuing upon everyone, the writer didn't just send these letters to Mary, Ron, and Gordon. They were actively sending letters explaining to newspapers, elected officials, and other citizens of Circleville that both Mrs. Gillespie and Mr. Massey were having an affair. The writer told everyone that Massey should be removed from his position at the school for his awful behavior and that he must be exposed for the person he truly is. The writer didn't stop until everyone in the town knew about their infidelities. Once Ron had passed, Mary and Gordon had come out and announced their relationship. However, the two still claimed that there was never infidelity, so this to me can mean one of two things. One, either there had been infidelity, or two, them sharing the same crazy experience had pushed them into the arms of each other. Mary, being the target of this anonymous writer, wouldn't stop after her husband's death, because on February of 1983, Mary Gillespie would be driving an empty school bus en route to pick up the children when something terrible would catch her eye. A handwritten sign on the opposite side of the road from her that had said obscene things about her daughter. And when Mary had ripped the sign down, she would see that it was rigged with a fully loaded gun. Immediately, Mary brought this to police, and it was evident that it was a trap set out deliberately for her. In the middle of her school bus route, when she had time to stop because there was no children on her bus with her. Police immediately began to investigate the gun and were able to determine who the gun was registered to. They went to the registered owner, and he told authorities that he had sold the gun to one of his co-workers, Paul Freshour. Paul's wife, Karen Sue, happened to be Ron's sister. Karen Sue had told authorities that she and her husband were once super close with Ron and Mary, but after Ron's death, they grew distant because Paul hated Mary for what had happened. Paul's hatred for Mary went as far as driving an unfixable wedge between him and Karen Sue, and they had been going through the process of a very messy divorce at the time. Karen Sue even told investigators that her estranged husband was the one responsible for all the letters. But once it came time for authorities to pay Paul a visit, he was extremely cooperative. He told them how his gun had been stolen weeks before the incident, invited them into his home to look around, and even gave them samples of his handwriting. It seemed as though Paul had nothing to hide. That was until he failed a polygraph test and was arrested for attempted murder. Now, Freshour was never convicted and deemed responsible for the Circleville Letters, but a lot of the citizens in the area did feel as though the man responsible for them had finally been locked up. And it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off Circleville. Paul had received the maximum sentence of 7 to 25 years in prison. But the huge weight that once lifted off the town had quickly been placed back on it because even though the suspected writer had been sentenced, the letters kept coming. But the peculiar part of it all was that the investigators, prosecutors, and even Paul Freshour himself were added to the list of targets. Paul was receiving these letters while he was in prison. Now, Paul was in solitary confinement because the officers truly believed that if Paul couldn't send the mail anymore, it would stop. But even though Paul couldn't send out mail, he was definitely still receiving it. The writer even told Paul that the entire thing was a setup against him, and people were quick to turn heads to the one that accused Paul in the first place, his ex-wife, Karen Sue. Except this theory didn't last very long when one of the investigators followed up on a piece of evidence that was never followed up in the original investigation. Allegedly, on the same bus route, another bus driver had seen a man standing at the bus stop, the one that Mary had found the trap at just 15 minutes prior. The other bus driver said that he was standing at the stop next to his car and quickly turned away from her as if he was trying to remain unknown. And the description didn't match Paul Freshour, not even remotely. Jumping ahead a little bit to 1993, the case was picked up by the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, to which they received their own letter directly from the source, the Ohio writer himself. And one of the very first volunteers to speak on the show was Paul Freshour. He wanted to share his innocence and help find the real anonymous writer. It had reached the point where these anonymous letters had been tormenting and antagonizing people for approximately 2 decades. There had been an estimate between a few hundred to 1,000 letters sent. Aggressive, nasty letters targeting people and their personal lives. There seemed to be no end in sight, until one day, there was. It stopped just as quickly as it had come on. Coincidentally, the day that the letters had stopped was the day that Paul was released from prison. But once again, new evidence had been investigated, and the rumors began to spread like wildfire once more. Allegedly, in the process of Paul and his ex-wife Karen Sue's messy divorce, their son Mark had taken his mother's side and wanted absolutely nothing to do with his father, not even visiting him once while he was in prison. But allegedly, before the booby trap was even ever brought into play, there were speculations that Mark was the one that had stolen his father's gun. And since these allegations were made before the booby trap had come into play, it didn't seem like a cover-up ploy. It seemed like a very real possibility. Around the time the letters had stopped, a body had been removed from the Scioto River. It was Paul and Karen Sue's son Mark. He sadly had taken his own life and was recovered by police. However, this case pulled investigators and the citizens into every direction. First, Ron believed it was Gordon. Then, Karen Sue believed it was Paul Freshour and thoroughly convinced everyone of this narrative as well. Then, everybody believed it could have possibly been Mark when the letters hadn't stopped when Paul was in prison. But another theory was that a man named Dwight L. Bowman was responsible for the letters. And Dwight had a motive. He was the superintendent at Circleville before he was fired. And who were the original letters targeted at? Mary, a bus driver for the school, and Dwight's replacement, Gordon Massey. Now again, this is a theory because there's no concrete evidence supporting this theory, just circumstantial. But the theories didn't stop here. Another major theory was that a local criminal named Thomas Lee Dillon could have been the anonymous writer. Thomas was an alleged violent and hardcore criminal. He had committed many crimes and eventually was convicted of murder. Thomas Dillon had even confessed to writing the letters at one point. However, this theory is kind of blown off because at this point, Thomas was already in prison, so how could he rig the booby trap or know everyone in the town's dirty little secrets? And he never came out and said anything about the case until after it had been televised in the talks of the town. And to this day, the Circleville Letters case has remained unsolved. Many agree with the original verdict that Paul Freshour was the one to write these letters and rig the booby trap. Some believe Paul's son, Mark, may have had some responsibility because how could Paul have done it when he didn't have access to sending out mail in prison? But few believe it was Dwight or Thomas. To this day, we still don't know if there was only one culprit or if there was a dynamic team behind closed doors. And that's the case of the Circleville Letters. I love researching unsolved cases for you guys. I enjoy listening to everyone's theories and thoughts on cold cases like this. So of course, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll be sure to engage with you guys. I really enjoyed researching this case, and I thought it would be fun to do for my birthday episode. I will see you guys next week with another episode, one that's so chilling and so gruesome that you'll be forced to turn your lights on.